started.
Well, come open, there'll be a lot of flames. That's what happens. Hey? What'd you say, Pep?
I moved your Mustang.
You moved your Mustang, yeah.
I thought you said like your Mustang.
Well, the origins of this engine, 25, was the Curtis Wright Aeroplane Company. That's Curtis with two S's, not one. And 1925, and the story of Charles Lindbergh with the Spirit of St. Louis, that was actually powered by a Wright whirlwind engine. And being in the early stages, that was 1927 when he flew it across the Atlantic, that engine had exposed valve gear. So you could see the push rods and the valve opening and all that sort of stuff. This engine in its American form was known as the Wright Cyclone, and they powered the very early DC2s and the DC3s. There is a DC3 in Melbourne that's got the American equivalent of this engine that belonged to Ansett A&A, and it's now flying. It's been dormant for a number of years and they've restored it and it's now flying. This engine in its American form powered the Boeing B-17 bomber that did lots of missions from the UK over Germany, as we know. They went, in the original form, they went from 750 horsepower to 1500 horsepower. And then in 1937, the Russians, being the Russians, decided to copy it. And what they did, they made it metric. A funny metric, as Max says.
Yeah.
It's a funny metric. Now this engine, in its Russian form, powers the Antonov AN-2, which is the largest single-engine biplane that's around. There is one here in Australia. It is painted yellow. It's known as Big Bird. It belonged to the late Barry Hempel in Queensland. I've actually seen it fly a number of times. The Russians built a little fighter in 1937 called a Polikarpov I-16, which is a with one of these 1,000 horsepower engine, 20 feet long, made out of wood, covered in fabric, doped, retractable undercarriage, the first single engine monoplane with a retractable undercarriage, and you had to wind a handle 45 times to wind the undercarriage up because it was attached to wires. That's how it worked.
It's also called the Rat.
Yeah, called the Rat, yes, or the Rata, or Little Donkey is its correct terminology. And then they built a biplane version of the same aeroplane, which was the fastest single-engine biplane, and they were both used as fighters against the Japanese when they invaded China prior to World War II. The Russians actually went into World War II with these Polikarpov fighters, and they were no match for the German engineering, of course, with Messerschmitt 109s and things like that. Now, Sir Tim Wallace, the founder of Wanaka Warbirds in New Zealand, found a heap of these Polikarpovs, both the biplane and the monoplane version, the wreckage of them lying up in northern Russia in the tundra, and they retrieved the wreckage and they rebuilt the aircraft in the factory that they were originally built in prior to World War II. And I do have some footage of that. And they ended up with 9 of them altogether flying in New Zealand. And I've seen 7 of them fly at one time, and they just chase each other around the sky. And they sound like a Harley Davidson on steroids. I'm really quite passionate about that with the noise. It's unbelievable, the noise. This engine, of course, was also built by the Chinese and, of course, by the Poles as well. And, of course, this is out of a PZL Dromadier, which is an agricultural aircraft, and from up the Benambera area. You've probably seen at times this bulky looking slow aeroplane that makes a lot of noise. Well, that's what one of these that's what this Dromadier is. Now, in a bit of my research last year, I said to Max, how many of these engines do you think the Russians have built? And he said, oh, maybe 10,000. And up to March last year, the Russians had built 40,000 of them, of this particular engine, known as an Ash 62R, or the actual design bureau was the Chev Sov, and it's SHEV-SOV. But the Russians still build them today, these engines. So that was to March last year, there was 40-odd thousand of them that they built, which is quite a lot really when you think about it. And they've just built in Germany the last 4 or 5 years a copy of the Focke-Wulf 190, which was a German World War II fighter with a radial engine that had a BMW radial engine. The availability of that engine is not available, if I can say that. And what they use a bigger version of this engine called an Ash 82R, which is about 1800 horsepower. Basically this same engine but 1800 horsepower.
Heavy weights on the front. We haven't got this motor never been fired yet.
One of the things that I'm going to say,
Can you move a bit, please?
this big handle that Max has got here, great handle. You would have seen wartime footage of a bloke standing on the wing of a Messerschmitt 109 winding this big handle up. Well, that's what this handle is. It's for an inertia starter. You just like winding up a big clock, like Big Ben. Wind it up and that spins the engine if you don't have the electrical power to do so.
Yeah, you can start it manually, wind it up and throw the solenoid in. It hasn't got a ring gear on it for those who are mechanically minded. It hasn't got a ring gear, so when I throw it into turn, it's just a big dog going straight on the end of the crankshaft. So, you know, they've got to be made of this pretty good stuff, because you can imagine this starter motor winding up like it does. I'll count to about 20 while the inertia winds it up, and then I'll throw it in, and it's just a bang. And of course you've got all that weight to turn at the front, all the cylinders and everything to turn, so it must have a pretty good dog to be able to turn it. I'm hanging back a little bit because I hate to be a bushfire, because the fire brigade was going to be here at 10:30, just in case we needed them, but they're not here yet. So Jamie's gone to get another fire extinguisher, and who else? There's a new fire extinguisher. No, I put a new one. You got, well, one can be
well, as I said, it'll shoot a bit of flame out and there'll be a lot of smoke until it settles down.
Emmy, I see there's still a few people coming, so what's the time?
10 to.
How long can you run it?
After 11, Max.
Run it without getting it properly?
Not all that long, because it hasn't got, I haven't built it for that thing to run it to. He's coming, is he just getting to back down to there? I'm only going to fire this thing up, check oil pressure, check fuel pressure and turn it off. You've got one too, have you? There's someone else.
We've got the fire truck.
We've got the fire truck in now, so I'll put this over here, Barry. Okay. And that's that big black mark on the bitumen there. It sort of caught on fire a bit. And what had happened, when I primed it up, because the carburetor's got a bowl on each side, bowl was stuck to the bottom. So therefore I couldn't get prime pressure. I only got 2 psi instead of about 4 to 5. And what was happening, it was just pouring straight down the guts of her into the supercharger and filling it all up, unbeknownst to me. When I woke up about it, I took the carburetor top off. It's like pulling the head off a blinking 4-cylinder car engine. And then I drained the supercharger, took the plugs out and wound it over and got all the fuel out of it. But for those that are mechanically minded, these silver pipes are the supercharged pipes that the fuel gets into each cylinder. If you look at this one here, it's got a bend up in it. That one must have been full of fuel, right? Even though I had the spark plugs out of it and turned it over, there wasn't any vacuum left in the head, in the compression, to suck the fuel in. So when I fired her, about 2 litres of fuel come out here. And these things spit a lot of flame and fire and whatever, and so she caught all the ground on fire. You might see I've got these ends now bent out a bit more. Last week I put another bit on to get it away from me because it gets a bit hot in there.
So, spat fuel all over Mick who was starting it the other day.
So, you know, it's
he'd be running.
You've
Jump.
be a little bit careful. So I just want to give the fire brigade a little bit of an idea of what's happening. I've got to put that on here a minute.
It's being prepared. The fire brigade's here with all the hoses and so on, just in case it catches fire. He's issued its orders, if it catches fire, it'll run over the other side of the garden away. The big start. Wind up with the starter. Yay! Success!